Section 29 of Further Chronicles of Avonlea. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Further Chronicles of Avonlea by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 15. Tannis of the Flats, Part 1. Few people in Avonlea could understand why Eleanor Blair had never married. She had been one of the most beautiful girls in our part of the island, and, as a woman of 50, she was still very attractive. In her youth she had had ever so many beaux, as we of our generation well remembered, but after her return from visiting her brother Tom in the Canadian Northwest more than 25 years ago, she had seemed to withdraw within herself, keeping all men at a safe though friendly distance. She had been a gay, laughing girl when she went out west. She came back quiet and serious, with a shadowed look in her eyes which time could not quite succeed in blotting out. Eleanor had never talked much about her visit, except to describe the scenery and the life, which in that day was rough indeed. Not even to me, who had grown up next door to her, and who had always seemed more like a sister than a friend, did she speak of other than the merest commonplaces. But when Tom Blair made a flying trip back home, some 10 years later, there were one or two of us to whom he related the story of Jerome Carey, a story revealing only too well the reason for Eleanor's sad eyes and utter indifference to masculine attentions. I can recall almost his exact words and the inflections of his voice, and I remember too that it seemed to me a far cry from the tranquil, pleasant scene before us, on that lovely summer day, to the elemental life of the Flats. The Flats was a forlorn little trading station 15 miles up the river from Prince Albert, with a scanty population of half-breeds and 3 white women. When Jerome Carey was sent to take charge of the telegraph office there, he cursed his fate in the picturesque language permissible in the far northwest. Not that Carey was a profane man, even as men go in the West. He was an English gentleman, and he kept both his life and his vocabulary pretty clean. But the Flats! Outside of the ragged cluster of log shacks which comprised the settlement, there was always a shifting fringe of teepees where the Indians, who drifted down from the reservation, camped with their dogs and squaws and papooses. There are standpoints from which Indians are interesting, but they cannot be said to offer congenial social attractions. For 3 weeks after Carey went to the Flats he was lonelier than he had ever imagined it possible to be, even in the great lone land. If it had not been for teaching Paul Dumont the telegraphic code, Carey believed he would have been driven to suicide in self-defense. The telegraphic importance of the Flats consisted in the fact that it was the starting point of 3 telegraph lines to remote trading posts up north. Not many messages came therefrom, but the few that did come generally amounted to something worthwhile. Days and even weeks would pass without a single one being clicked to the Flats. Carey was debarred from talking over the wires to the Prince Albert man for the reason that they were on officially bad terms. He blamed the latter for his transfer to the Flats. Carey slept in a loft over the office, and got his meals at Joe Esquint's, across the street. Joe Esquint's wife was a good cook, as cooks go among the breeds, and Carey soon became a great pet of hers. Carey had a habit of becoming a pet with women. He had the way that has to be born in a man and can never be acquired. Besides, he was as handsome as clean-cut features, deep-set, dark blue eyes, fair curls, and 6 feet of muscle could make him. Mrs. Joe Esquint thought that his mustache was the most wonderfully beautiful thing in its line that she had ever seen. Fortunately, Mrs. Joe was so old and fat and ugly that even the malicious and inveterate gossip of skulking breeds and Indians, squatting over tepee fires, could not hint at anything questionable in the relations between her and Carey. But it was a different matter with Tannis Dumont. Tannis came home from the academy at Prince Albert early in July, when Carey had been at the Flats a month and had exhausted all the few novelties of his position. Paul Dumont had already become so expert at the code that his mistakes no longer afforded Carey any fun, and the latter was getting desperate. He had serious intentions of throwing up the business altogether and betaking himself to an Alberta ranch, where at least one would have the excitement of roping horses. When he saw Tannis Dumont, he thought he would hang on a while longer, anyway. Tannis was the daughter of old Auguste Dumont, who kept the one small store at the Flats, lived in the one frame house that the place boasted, and was reputed to be worth an amount of money which, in half-breed eyes, was a colossal fortune. Old Auguste was black and ugly and notoriously bad-tempered, but Tannis was a beauty. Tannis's great-grandmother had been a Cree squaw who married a French trapper. The son of this union became in due time the father of Auguste Dumont. Auguste married a woman whose mother was a French half-breed and whose father was a pure-bred Highland Scotchman. The result of this atrocious mixture was its justification, Tannis of the Flats, who looked as if all the blood of all the Howards might be running in her veins. But, after all, the dominant current in those same veins was from the race of plain and prairie. The practised eye detected it in the slender stateliness of carriage, in the graceful yet voluptuous curves of the lithe body, in the smallness and delicacy of hand and foot, in the purple sheen on straight falling masses of blue-black hair, and more than all else, in the long dark eye, full and soft, yet alight with a slumbering fire. France, too, was responsible for somewhat in Tannis. It gave her a light step in place of the stealthy half-breed shuffle, it arched her red upper lip into a more tremulous bow, it lent a note of laughter to her voice and a springier wit to her tongue. As for her red-headed Scotch grandfather, he had bequeathed her a somewhat whiter skin and ruddier bloom than is usually found in the breeds. Old Auguste was mightily proud of Tannis. He sent her to school for 4 years in Prince Albert, bound that his girl should have the best. A high school course and considerable mingling in the social life of the town, for old Auguste was a man to be conciliated by astute politicians, since he controlled some 200 or 300 half-breed votes, sent Tannis home to the Flats with a very thin but very deceptive veneer of culture and civilization overlying the primitive passions and ideas of her nature. Carrie saw only the beauty and the veneer. He made the mistake of thinking that Tannis was what she seemed to be, a fairly well-educated, up-to-date young woman with whom a friendly flirtation was just what it was with white womankind, the pleasant amusement of an hour or season. It was a mistake, a very big mistake. Tannis understood something of piano playing, something less of grammar and Latin, and something still less of social prevarications. But she understood absolutely nothing of flirtation. You can never get an Indian to see the sense of platonics. Carrie found the Flats quite tolerable after the homecoming of Tannis. He soon fell into the habit of dropping into the Dumont house to spend the evening, talking with Tannis in the parlor, which apartment was amazingly well done for a place like the Flats. Tannis had not studied Prince Albert parlors for years for nothing, or playing violin and piano duets with her. When music and conversation palled, they went for long gallops over the prairies together. Tannis rode to perfection, and managed her bad-tempered brute of a pony with a skill and grace that made Carrie applaud her. She was glorious on horseback. Sometimes he grew tired of the prairies, and then he and Tannis paddled themselves over the river in Nietzsche Joe's dugout, and landed on the old trail that struck straight into the wooded belt of the Saskatchewan Valley, leading north to trading posts on the frontier of civilization. There they rambled under huge pines, hoary with the age of centuries, and Carrie talked to Tannis about England and quoted poetry to her. Tannis liked poetry. She had studied it at school and understood it fairly well. But once she told Carrie that she thought it a long, roundabout way of saying what you could say just as well in about a dozen plain words. Carrie laughed. He liked to evoke those little speeches of hers. They sounded very clever, dropping from such arched, ripely tinted lips. If you had told Carrie that he was playing with fire, he would have laughed at you. In the first place, he was not in the slightest degree in love with Tannis. He merely admired and liked her. In the second place, it never occurred to him that Tannis might be in love with him. Why, he had never attempted any love-making with her. And above all, he was obsessed with that aforesaid fatal idea that Tannis was like the women he had associated with all his life, in reality as well as in appearance. He did not know enough of the racial characteristics to understand. But if Carrie thought his relationship with Tannis was that of friendship merely, he was the only one at the Flats who did think so. All the half-breeds and quarter-breeds and any fractional breeds there believed that he meant to marry Tannis. There would have been nothing surprising to them in that. They did not know that Carry's second cousin was a baronet, and they would not have understood that it need make any difference if they had. They thought that rich old August's heiress, who had been to school for 4 years in Prince Albert, was a catch for anybody. Old August himself shrugged his shoulders over it and was well pleased enough. An Englishman was a prize by way of a husband for a half-breed girl, even if he were only a telegraph operator. Young Paul Dumont worshipped Carry, and the half-Scotch mother, who might have understood, was dead. In all the flats there were but 2 people who disapproved of the match they thought an assured thing. One of these was the little priest, Father Gabriel. He liked Tannis, and he liked Carry, but he shook his head dubiously when he heard the gossip of the shacks and teepees. Religions might mingle, but the different bloods, it was not the right thing. Tannis was a good girl, and a beautiful one, but she was no fit mate for the fair, thoroughbred Englishman. Father Gabriel wished fervently that Jerome Carey might soon be transferred elsewhere. He even went to Prince Albert and did a little wire-pulling on his own account, but nothing came of it. He was on the wrong side of politics. The other malcontent was Lazare Mokute, a lazy, besotted French half-breed, who was after his fashion in love with Tannis. He could never have got her, and knew it. Old Auguste and young Paul would have incontinently riddled him with bullets had he ventured near the house as a suitor, but he hated Carey none the less, and watched for a chance to do him an ill turn. There is no worse enemy in all the world than a half-breed. Your true Indian is bad enough, but his deluded descendant is 10 times worse. As for Tannis, she loved Carey with all her heart, and that was all there was to it. If Eleanor Blair had never gone to Prince Albert, there is no knowing what might have happened after all. Carey, so powerful in propinquity, might even have ended by learning to love Tannis and marrying her, to his own worldly undoing. But Eleanor did go to Prince Albert, and her going ended all things for Tannis of the Flats. Carey met her one evening in September, when he had ridden into town to attend a dance, leaving Paul Dumont in charge of the telegraph office. Eleanor had just arrived in Prince Albert on a visit to Tom, to which she had been looking forward during the 5 years since he had married and moved out west from Avonlea. As I have already said, she was very beautiful at that time, and Carey fell in love with her at the first moment of their meeting. During the next 3 weeks he went to town 9 times and called at the Dumonts only once. There were no more rides and walks with Tannis. This was not intentional neglect on his part. He had simply forgotten all about her. The breeds surmised a lover's quarrel, but Tannis understood. There was another woman back there in town. It would be quite impossible to put on paper any adequate idea of her emotions at this stage. One night she followed Carey when he went to Prince Albert, riding out of earshot, behind him on her plains pony, but keeping him in sight. Lazare, in a fit of jealousy, had followed Tannis, spying on her until she started back to the flats. After that he watched both Carey and Tannis incessantly, and months later had told Tom all he had learned through his low sneaking. Tannis trailed Carey to the Blair house on the bluffs above the town, and saw him tie his horse at the gate and enter. She, too, tied her pony to a poplar, lower down, and then crept stealthily through the willows at the side of the house until she was close to the windows. Through one of them she could see Carey and Eleanor. The half-breed girl crouched down in the shadow and glared at her rival. She saw the pretty, fair-tinted face, the fluffy coronal of golden hair, the blue, laughing eyes of the woman whom Jerome Carey loved, and she realized very plainly that there was nothing left to hope for. She, Tannis of the Flats, could never compete with that other. It was well to know so much, at least. After a time she crept softly away, loosed her pony, and lashed him mercilessly with her whip through the streets of the town and out the long, dusty river trail. A man turned and looked after her as she tore past a brightly lighted store on Water Street. "That was Tannis of the Flats," he said to a companion. "She was in town last winter, going to school. A beauty and a bit of the devil, like all those breed girls. What in thunder is she riding like that for?" One day, a fortnight later, Carey went over the river alone for a ramble up the northern trail, and an undisturbed dream of Eleanor. When he came back, Tannis was standing at the canoe landing, under a pine tree, in a rain of finely sifted sunlight. She was waiting for him, and she said, without any preface, "Mr. Carey, Why do you never come to see me now?" Carrie flushed like any girl. Her tone and look made him feel very uncomfortable. He remembered, self-reproachfully, that he must have seemed very neglectful, and he stammered something about having been busy. "Not very busy," said Tannis with her terrible directness. "It is not that. It is because you are going to Prince Albert to see a white woman." Section 29.